Welcome to WooCommerce Live. I am Jonathan Wold, and I lead community initiatives here at WooCommerce. With me is my co-host, Nöelle Steegs. She's a developer and a volunteer here in the WooCommerce community. Good to see you, Nöelle.
Good to see you too, Jonathan.
So we got a lot to cover today. We're going to be talking about how to improve the checkout experience in your e-commerce store, and quite excited. We've had a lot of good questions coming in, and we're going to answer as many of those as we can on today's show. And at the end of the show, we will be doing live Q&A. We've got a special guest joining us for that, and we'll be answering more questions that you guys have. So think about what you'd like to ask, and you can begin to drop them either on Facebook or on YouTube, and we'll get to those after the main show. So let's go ahead and get started. Nöelle, what are some of the wins that we have to celebrate in the community in this past week?
I wanted to highlight two people that are both new, but they're already creating such meaningful conversation, either through posts or comments. The one is Ben Kextel. Ben, I hope I pronounced your name correctly. And there's Al Eden. Thanks so much for contributing to the community, for taking the time to answer people's questions and, to formulate yours well when you have one. I've seen a lot of conversations around these two people. So that's awesome.
That's fantastic. And I also wanted to give a shout out to the Lima Peru meetup group, which has been quite active. And if you're looking for a group in Spanish, or if you speak English and you're curious to see what happens in Spanish, that's a fantastic group to check out. So we love the community. There's so much that's happening. The Facebook group is growing. We're coming up on 40,000 members here shortly. So if you're not part of the Facebook group, you want to check that out. And with that, let's go ahead and jump into today's topic. So improving checkout was one of the most popular topics that's been suggested. It's at the heart of having an e-commerce store, right? Like if folks express that interest, they want to make a purchase. We want to make sure that they have a good checkout experience. And that's what it's about. At the heart, when you think about checkout, what we find the most helpful, what we encourage you is to think about the overall experience that your customers are having. And we suggest that there are two key aspects of that to think about and questions to ask yourself. The first is to think about reducing friction. And the question that you ask is, how can I make it easier for my customers to buy from me? We'll talk more about that in a moment. The second is increasing value. How can I offer more value to my customers during the checkout process? So during today's show, we're going to focus on those two areas and answer the questions that you've sent in. And then we'll share some specific resources and recommendations along the way as we go, and then towards the end of the show as well. So Nöelle, let's get started with that. How should we think about this idea of reducing friction?
I know it's like a hot topic, and no surprise to me that it was chosen by our community. So there are many different ways to reduce friction, and I'll chat about like the most common ones, right? So one of the number one reasons for checkout abandonment, which means people leaving from the checkout page before they've actually completed the purchase, is hidden costs. Mostly shipping costs is mostly the bad one here. Sometimes tax, if it's not displayed with tax on the website. But shipping costs is the big one. People somehow just don't like paying for shipping. I advise to merchants, always offer a free shipping threshold if you can. If you can't, which is also understandable, then flat rates are great because you can display them very clearly on the website, and people know upfront, okay, I'm going to add $5 to my order for shipping or whatever. But if they get there and suddenly it's $20 and they had no idea, chances are that they can leave. So there's that. There's also the way of checking out. Depending on your setup, you might want to have people create accounts, but forcing them to create an account is not done. You should make it as easy as possible for them, as least steps as possible and not force them upon your customers. So I would say to always allow for guest checkout. Guest checkout shouldn't be the question. Whether or not you want to create accounts and manage those is yes or no, but guests should always be there. Then also, less is more. So think about the data that you really need to capture here, and don't capture the data that you don't need. For example, if you know that you always sell, to people directly, to customers, and not your business, you might choose to hide the company field. If you're selling virtual products, no need to capture a shipping address. I do see it time and time again. And I just want to share a quick resource for that as well, which is a post on the Wold blog about customizing checkout fields. And they guide you on doing this very easily with PHP. Now, not all of you guys have maybe, dabbled into PHP before, and that's okay. I see this as a really good first start because you have the code right here. And depending on what you want to hide, you just use those lines. So it's really like a copy, paste, and edit kind of thing. I would argue you don't need to know PHP to be able to use this. Test it on your staging site. Works really well for that first customization. Also, you don't want to have any distractions. So some people choose to completely hide their navigation and their footer, and they will just have, an easy way to contact, and they will have a logo so it's recognizable, but they'll really minimize all of that. You want to make sure that the page loads fast as well. It's so important. This is actually a resource that I wanted to show as well. It is a plugin that recently came out, so it's still new, but these guys, they have really looked at things really closely, looked at many case studies and improved so many points on checkout. When it comes to the less is more approach, they had a good look at that. I have seen many questions in the community about how to create this linear checkout, this kind of step-by-step checkout that's super user-friendly. And this plugin does just that. So check that out if you're interested in that kind of thing. And then the last thing I want to raise is making sure that you send as many trust signals as you can. So you might want to show like a SSL or security badge. You will want to show an easy way to contact, whether you have your phone number right next to that checkout button, or whether it's a live chat that you have floating about. I've seen mini FAQs there, right there. If you want to know about, say, the returns or whatever the case may be, sometimes you can just click there. You have it in a little pop-up. Just make it really easy for people to check things last minute if they need to. And that will really help with the conversion.
That's fantastic. And I'm just going to pull it up real quick. I'm having some trouble with my screen sharing. But Sunday was a happiness engineer who works on WooCommerce, shared another resource. So if I recommend if you're feeling ambitious and want to learn, it's great to follow that tutorial and play with a little bit of code, which you can do quite simply. And if you don't want to do that and you want to use a plugin instead, then here is the checkout field editor plugin, which you can use to customize those fields without touching any code.
Yes, which works very well as well. And also when you want to maybe rename fields or move them about or add ones, then I would definitely say this is a really good one. I've used it as well.
Fantastic. So how about we jump to the first question? So Nöelle, we had the first question from Dane, which was, this was submitted in advance. Do customers really want a one-page checkout, or is it better to split it into several pages? What do you think?
I would say it depends. My son is having fun on the side here. in many cases, the answer will be it depends. However, I would say in general, yes, one page having a really good overview of your next steps is mostly desirable. That's what I see a lot of case studies about. That's what I see a lot of people asking for. So, I would say if you don't have data to think that you do need a multi-page one, then go for the one-page kind of linear approach.
And to that, I would add, the thing that's important to keep in mind is that starting point of who's your audience and what problem are you solving for them. And it very much does depend. For some audiences, I think we'll touch on this a bit more later. If there is a more complex checkout process, or there's more things that they need to go through, especially like a B2B situation, et cetera, it makes sense to have additional steps. But for a lot of folks, especially if you're direct to consumer, like you want to reduce that friction as much as possible. And having a single page can be a great way to do that.
Mm-hmm.
The next question we had was from Lawrence and Andreas. What possibilities are there to customize the checkout process? That's sort of at the heart of this. Like, what are some of the ways that we can go about it? And what do you think about that, Nöelle?
Yeah, sure. There's so many things that you can do, right? There was questions about built-in. If you think about built-in options, when you think about the checkout process, don't just think about the fields, but also think about your options. So your payment and your shipping options, for example, is your audience well served with a same day or next day delivery option? Or, what is your audience maybe, more mature, and they might not be that technical, and they might still need the direct wire transfer option. Those kind of things are also things to think about when customizing checkout out of the box.
Awesome.
What
I would add to that is there are quite a few extensions available, and we'll share some more of those later that you can use. And also the theme that you choose to use can offer you built-in options for customizing checkout further. That is always a great place to start. So depending on what theme you're using, it's good to explore and see like what options they have sort of built out of the box. One of the things, and it's improving all the time in Woo as well, but Woo, if you're using WooCommerce sort of out of the box, it takes a pretty like default, like a non-opinionated approach to like what that experience looks like. And in most cases, you want to customize that to be a better fit for the audience that you're serving and the problem that you're solving for them.
So Jonathan, we got this question through from Nadur and Miroslav. They asked, how do we ensure that customers convert from wanting to add a product all the way to the purchase? How can they improve those conversion rates? So not just on the checkout itself, but the entire process. What do you think?
So I think it's well in line with this general theme of the experience, right? I think this starts with us asking this question, like, what do we have control over? For us as store owners, what are the things that we can actually work on in terms of the experience? And I find that it's helpful to start by asking, what's this experience going to be like from their perspective? A great example is if you know that a lot of your customers would be making a purchase on mobile, one of the best ways to improve the conversion rate is to just reduce as much friction as possible. Do not make them create an account on a mobile device. All right, like that's a showstopper more often than not, right? So if you start with this idea of like, all right, what audience am I serving? And then what can I do to look at it from their perspective? We'll talk a bit more about testing and getting feedback later. But I think that's the heart of it. If you want to increase the conversion rate, reducing friction is where most, I think, of the magic that you're going to find is. And the way to go about that is to ask yourself, with this particular audience in mind, what do I have control over? What can I do? And if, for instance, you know that it's going to be folks on mobile, what you tend to have the most control over is how simple you can make that checkout process, how fast you can make it, making sure that the page load is good. And then, at the heart of that is if you can reduce that friction, that's in most cases your best shot at increasing the conversion rate. Anything that you'd add?
No, I think that's really well said, and there is so much that can be done.
Awesome. Let's jump to the next question. Jacob wanted to know, is there an option for one-page checkout like Shopify on WooCommerce or a multi-step checkout? What are some of the options available? So I'm going to share my screen and let's see if we got this working the way that we want it to now. Yes, there we go. So there are quite a few available. Here is one of the extensions that you can use. WooCommerce one-page checkout lets you go in and get a one-page checkout. It has quite a few options for customization in it. And I think
so. It will show the products and the checkout together on one page, right?
Yes. And we showed the other one previously, and we'll drop links into the show notes afterwards for anyone who's missed
the linear checkout. Yeah, I would, if you're looking for that kind of style checkout, that could be a good starting point, depending on your exact needs.
Yep. Yeah. That's what I would suggest starting with. Play with those, and then you can search the marketplace for other checkout related extensions as well. What do we have next?
Right. So Kenny and Itai asked about validation, about how can they make sure that their customers type their email address correctly and their shipping address correctly. My first thought here is Google autocomplete. I've seen extensions around for that. Where people can start typing an address and, Google will spit out these options and you just click on the correct one and it fills it in. That really helps. And then what do you think about the email, Jonathan? What can people do there?
Yeah, so validation is great. Like, I think the first thing and a general principle to keep in mind here is focus your validation on serving the audience. Sometimes validation can be a real point of friction, where if you have something that's too aggressive, they might put in perfectly legitimate values, and it just doesn't work, and that's a major frustration point, right?
Like people with 2-letter names, right?
Yes.
Like they have this all the time everywhere. It's no.
I often see validation employed as a way of helping the store owner. And if you're thinking about this within the context of reducing friction, I think the general guidance is don't be too aggressive with validation. I would rather, in general, like if I'm advising a store owner, like working on my own store, I would rather deal with some of the problems on the back end and fix the data myself, rather than, because part of the issue is that you oftentimes don't know who's getting stuck in your checkout process. If they didn't properly validate, you often don't know about it, right? So in general, I would recommend being gracious and with your validation, and use as little as possible, and then bring it more in as you find persistent problem areas. Awesome. So we had a lot of questions that have come in. We know we already won't get to all the ones that are submitted. That's okay. Let's see if we wanted to grab one more from the reducing friction. Let's see here. So Mariano asked if you were selling event tickets, is one-page checkout or multi-step checkout easier? And I think we'll just sort of reiterate, this has been a recurring theme, like how do you pick? And it depends. And the guiding thought that we would offer is focus on what's best for your customer, right? For instance, if you were selling events that had multiple steps, that maybe it was more of like a business to business type of event, and there's different components, it makes sense to have a multi-step checkout. If it's something that is like for a new audience and they haven't been to one of the events before, in general, you want to favor something that's straightforward. So as you're looking at your options, whether you go with a one-page checkout or whether you go with multi-step, the highest level recommendation is to focus on the audience that you're serving, the problem that you're solving for them, and follow their lead in that. What makes it sort of most straightforward for them? Anything else to add on reducing friction before we jump over?
I just quickly wanted to touch on the topic of the coupon field. Obviously, coupons is an awesome functionality to have. It's very useful. But when people see a coupon field on your checkout, there's chances that they will leave your website and go hunt for a coupon. And that's not really what you want, right? So the advice here is to put it in a place, or or with styling and color. Just make sure that the hierarchy that is not like so eye-catching. What you can also do, what I actually did for a client of mine, because of how he handles coupons, I completely hid the coupon field at checkout. But his customers, they actually get their coupons via email with a link that they click on. And that still works beautifully. So people can only enter a coupon like that and get a coupon like that. So then there's no distraction at checkout for people who don't have coupons sent to them.
That's a fantastic tip. I don't know about you, but I've definitely been wired for that. I have to, if I see a coupon code field, it's like an automatic go and search for something. And I have to remind myself sometimes, like it's frustrating if you don't find it. I've seen people take advantage of that from a marketing perspective, and they'll try to like rank top. But in general, if you can find smoother ways to do that, that's better. Awesome. So let's talk about the increasing value side of things. And the heart of the idea here. So if you've looked for ways to reduce friction, the heart of the idea here is to look for more ways to increase value to your customer. And there are a number of ways that you can do that. One of the first things to think about is how can you customize the checkout experience just overall to match the needs of your audience? We've touched on this a few times. And that starts by just like keeping things simple for them, making sure that they have the information that they need where they need it, especially if you get into more sort of custom types of experiences. Look for opportunities to really like fine tune it for what's most useful to them and what helps them get the job done that they're needing to get done. Examples of things to think about are preferred payment methods, right? Some of the audience that you're serving may have preferred ways to pay for things, and make sure that that's incorporated within sort of what you're doing. Next, another thing to be keeping in mind is look for opportunities to offer relevant products and services as add-ons during the checkout process. Great examples of this are faster shipping. Someone in some situations, they might want expedited shipping. Not all of your audiences do, but for those where it's relevant, that can be a great add-on to offer. Gift wrapping can be another example. And to the point that Nöelle made earlier, like one of the things you want to avoid is surprises, right? So like having free shipping is a great example of something that you include that, but you could give them the option of expedited shipping, but don't think about how you present that to them as like an option, not something that you're forcing on them. Other examples of the types of things that you might include are the option to like spread payments out. And finally, one of the things to think about is just this general like upsell opportunity. Once someone's completed the purchase, that could be a great opportunity or ask them if they want to get something else that's related to it, give them a special offer. And there's some great extensions that you can look at for that. We're going to start wrapping up, and just wanted to give a couple of recommendations here. At a broad level. What was the first one that we wanted to talk about, Nöelle?
Say again.
Well, on the recommendations front, we wanted to talk about testing.
Oh yes, absolutely. So testing is very important. Test yourself on desktop and on mobile. Always do it in an incognito tab, I would recommend. You can use heat mapping. Heat mapping tools are very useful to see how your user, uses your site. You can ask people in your network to test for you. Test, especially after big updates or adding some new functionality.
Awesome. The other thing we wanted to keep in mind is just getting feedback, right? Like ask your audience for feedback pre-purchase and post-purchase. Listen and look for ways to follow their leads. We have a couple of extension recommendations. Unfortunately, I'm unable to show them on the screen right now, but you'll see all these in the show notes afterwards. One of them is you can look at Automate Woo, which is a great way to play with emails, where you can send feedback emails, you can send abandoned cart emails. There are a lot of opportunities. That right there is a great category to look into as well. Another one that you might want to take a look at is one called launch flows, where you can play with this post-purchase upsell process and sort of what that looks like. And there are quite a few. Check out the WooCommerce marketplace, where you can browse the extensions and try things out there. I highly recommend that. Okay, so we've got lots more questions that we weren't able to get to, but we have plenty of time for Q&A. So let's go ahead and wrap up the main show. Thank you guys all for joining us. It's been fantastic having you. We really like shaping these episodes around what you're sharing. So it was awesome seeing all the questions come in. We've got the next couple of episodes lined up. Next week, we're going to get into the marketing topic, and we're going to talk about creating customers. Like, how do you get more? What are some of the best practices? What are some of the pitfalls and challenges there? We'd love to have you join us again next week, live, same time, same place. And you can look for the announcement email and details later this week. Also wanted to give a shout out to the WooCommerce product team has been looking for folks who want to be part of beta testing early versions of extensions and new product updates and integrations. So we'll drop a link to that as well. I highly recommend that you guys check that out. It's a great way to give early feedback and sort of see what's coming with Woo. And let me just see if I can share that. Looks like I'm going to just pull this up on the screen. I'm going to attempt to pull this up on the screen. There we go. And were there any other resources that we wanted to share, Nöelle?
We could touch on the checkout blocks, customizing the checkout with WooCommerce blocks. Nice. Though I must say, because of the different frameworks that I use, I don't personally have much experience with that. How about you?
I'm going to pull that up onto the screen here. So this is Sunday screen. He'll be joining us on camera in just a moment. And here is what that looks like with built into there's the WooCommerce blocks extension, which allows you to, in the new WordPress editor, you can play with different sort of variations there. So that's another good resource. We'll drop a link to that as well. All right, let me just switch that off. Perfect. So there's a lot to think about when it comes to the checkout, sort of improving the checkout process as a whole. But if you focus on reducing friction and looking for ways to add additional value, I think that's the heart of where you're going to see the most progress in being able to improve your conversion rates. So we've got a lot of resources. We'll include those in the show notes. And that is it for the main show. We're now going to transition over to our live Q&A.